And we are live. All right. We're joined this hour by Victor Payan, who is a humorist, a multidisciplinary artist. He is the co-creator of the OC Film Festival. He is one of the co-founders of the Taco Shop Poets. He is a co-founder of Dreamocracy in America. This man is an organizer, an artist, a event producer. I mean, he's worn many hats, and he's lived many a life, and he's truly he shames all of us. I mean, this is and we're so glad to have you for this hour. So, Victor, um, let's get started. I mean, there's several beginnings here, but like, well, let's get started at the beginning. Well, how did you know? When did you first know that you wanted to be an artist and pursue a life in the arts?
Well, I come from a community in San Diego called El Cajon, which is about 15 miles east of the San Diego. And my family's from Tijuana, so we had the whole border experience going on there. And I've always wanted to be a writer. That was my first passion ever since I was, in junior high. Would read a lot of poetry, would write a lot of poetry. That was where I kind of wanted to go. And then later I would find out that El Cajon also is where Lester Bangs, the father of rock journalism, came from, and Mike Davis lived there for a while. So there's a strong tradition in the East County of like counterculture, rebellious, critics. And as I started writing, you realize pretty on you can't really make a living as a writer. So I went to college, went to Stanford, and then when I came back to San Diego, I worked as an editor for El Sol de San Diego newspaper. I worked on PBS documentaries with Paul Espinoza on the U.S.-Mexican War was one that we're pretty proud of. And then started, being part of the San Diego cultural community, which at that time, the Centro Cultural de la Raza was still a vital force. Grew up around people like Guillermo Gomez Peña, the Border Art Workshop, so many wonderful people. But the main thing that kind of connected us was that the border experience really gave us this sense of absurdity, that you're living two realities, that there's so much disparity, so much injustice, and that really to navigate that space, you really need to learn how to be absurd. We call what I call the counter absurdity campaign. And the border region throughout the 80s and 90s was like the one place all the Republicans would go to get their photo shoot, to talk about the war on, the hordes coming over. And it bore nothing to the reality that we experienced every day. So as a creative person, you want to talk about that and share that, because as we see even today, there's all this stuff going around where there's you see what's the mediated message, and then everyone, you look around, they're like, what the, that's not what I'm seeing. So to be a voice that helps people see that they're not alone, that was important to me. And then out of that San Diego experience, I was part of the group that started the Taco Shop Poets. It was a really cool collective down there. Also, I had an open mic called Everything's Allowed, which was known as the open mic where people could go for the first time, where either they had never read or performed, or they hadn't read or performed in 20 years. It was a safe space to get people back in there, in front of a crowd. And then working on festivals like Chicano Park Day, the Adams Avenue Street Fair, the San Diego Latino Film Festival, really showed me that if you bring people together, that, you can have a collective transmission of culture, a collective rejoicing, and also a transmission of information and strategies. Because, we look at how the, there's a lot of racists right now, but also they've always been here. And so it's important when you talk to people, we have strategies of resistance, and it's important to see how we've been able to, when you can share that with somebody else, with the next generation, it's a very important tool.
Yeah. So let's dig into this. I mean, we have about an hour, so there's a lot to cover. So tell us about the founding of the Taco Shop Poets.
Well, the early 90s was a really exciting time for Chicano culture. It was right around the time of the quincentenary. A lot of groups were starting up. You're from El Sereno. El Sereno was a real happening place. All these groups came out of there. And with El Sereno, it was kind of like the backyard party scene. You didn't have any spaces available, so you made your own spaces, and people networked and organized. And then the Chiapas movement came around. And so San Diego was the same thing. People organizing around issues of the border, of the Cuba caravan, of Zapatismo, of the injustices that we saw, police brutality. And so there were all these creative people. And at that time, like I said, the Centro Cultural de la Raza was kind of a vital place. So a lot of us were working there. And then as the outcoming of these different activities. There was spoken word, there was graffiti, there was music, there was, indigenous dance, there was like rockabilly, punk rock, all this stuff coming together, performance art, that a collective started forming. And the idea was, because it was in a car with Adolfo Guzman and Adriana Arancibia, and we were going to a reading at a cafe in India Street, and I said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could do this and just go to taco shops, bring the poetry to the people. And the great thing about taco shops is that, especially in San Diego, where there's a lot of 24-hour taco shops, is that you could go to a taco shop at different parts of the day and you would find a completely different community. So there was one in Hillcrest, it was right down from the medical center. So at 2 a.m. you'd have the bar crowd. And then at 4 a.m. you'd have the people going into work at the hospital. And then at 5 a.m. you'd have all the obreros. And then in the afternoon, the same thing, you have the lunch crowd, you have the late night crowd, you have the after party crowd, you have the art crowd. And they were all meeting at the same place, but they never intersected. And so, so this was a way to bring people together in common places, almost like an intertidal zone. At different times of the day, the shore has different ecosystems. And so I saw taco shops as a way, as it's very similar. So Taco Shop Poets started as a collective to bring the readers to the people, but also, very importantly, to inspire people at these taco shops who never thought of themselves as poets. And in the different communities that we went to, it was the same thing. We would connect with kind of known established poets, but also there was a period where people could come up and read, because, like I said, being a creative time, there were a lot of people writing, but they weren't all like trained readers or trained poets. So this was a way to say anybody can do it. English, Spanish, doesn't matter. It's a safe space, has tacos. And it was really transformative. In the first couple of years, I think it just went, throughout the state. And then it became the group of 4 people. But it's really important to recognize that period when it was the collective, because there were a lot of younger voices, a range of visions, a range of backgrounds, of ages. And but it was all in that early 90s cauldron of creativity, but facing these really grim, brutal political realities. How do we speak and get these messages out there? And I use humor a lot, so that was a basis of what I do. But there's just something great about bringing people together to experience the same thing.
Yeah. So how were the responses to the taco shops? Is anyone like, I'm eating a taco, or were they just all embraced it?
Everybody embraced it. I mean, it was a pretty safe audience, in the sense that there were no real haters down there. I mean, it was a really cool thing. It was a real fun experience. And so, it did inspire a lot of people. If there was one reaction people had to the experience of going to a taco shop reading was, wow, I can be a poet too. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the main goal of the idea. And so, as it did its share of that, as it morphs onto different things, now with the introduction of the internet, it's like we can do that again without having to even leave our houses, that we can reach these audiences and have different traditions. There were slam poets, there were more beat poets, there were, transfronteriza poets. And so it was really exciting. And we did readings in Tijuana too. But the taco shop is really a place where people come together. And even now, when people were afraid in 2016 of a taco shop on every corner, during this pandemic, like, wouldn't that be great if there was a taco shop on every corner? So it kind of, also makes you think that regardless of what the opposition is saying, or the critics or the haters, there's always some agenda there, but you have to trust your own experience, your own gut, and your own vision. And you can't really, edit yourself to what you think they think, because there's somebody out there that needs your message.
Yeah. So getting more to kind of your own personal journey, like, when did you decide you wanted to become a poet? Like, how did poetry come to you?
I mean, it was like I said, from the very beginning. I remember when I was in high school, I had a great English teacher, and back then I was really into the romantic poets, lyrical poets. But the romantics are really revolutionaries too. They're against the Industrial Revolution. They're for freedom of expression, for love, for really tapping into, at that time also, which I think connected with me later, they were actually very much into the natural world, and also natural, what do you call it? Not phenomenon, but the mysticism of the natural world. And I say that because in the early 90s, when you're talking about like revolutionary Chicanos, a lot of people were looking at Marx, and they're looking at socialism and communism from a European perspective. But in the early 90s, it really came to the forefront that indigenous collective socialism is different from European socialism. And what I saw as the main difference is that the Europeans are looking at the industrial world, and the indigenous communities are looking at the natural world.
Yeah.
So environmentalism, collectivism, shared resources, water are very central to that indigenous, socialism, as is sharing of resources, as is, sharing of, knowledge, deployment throughout the generations, very important. But also of that idea that, like that mi otro yo idea, that if you take too much of one resource for yourself, someone else is going to suffer. And then what's to stop them from taking your resources? So I think that that's really critical in terms of like the poetry that I write, and the work that I do, is that idea that we're all interconnected, and that like this hate is just a false mediated filter that's being thrown upon us, but it's not our natural state.
Yeah, yeah. Well, tell us about the Keep on Crossing project.
Keep on Crossing project was a collaboration I did with artist Perry Vasquez. That it started for a couple of things. One, with NAFTA, because the main question was with NAFTA, is free trade, is how come companies and factories and polluters can cross the border easily, and you're lifting restrictions, but people can't. So if I came by with a load of toxic sludge and I wanted to put it in Mexico, it made it a lot easier. But if I came from Mexico with a shovel and some clippers, I couldn't, so it was inherently absurd. So we really had to attack it. So we started out going to do a patch, kind of like a space patch. And then we were going to do the state quarter competition, because we submitted the design that we did for the state quarter competition. And I wrote a manifesto. And then we realized that people were really excited by it. So Keep on Crossing was a take on Art Crumb's Keep on Trucking. But the guy was, like I said, a campesino and really cool guy. And when we were making that, my driving kind of question was, how do we create a character that you can't not like? Which means that if we went to a picket or a protest or whatever, even like a supremacist, a racist, a skinhead, they'd look at that and they would go, oh, that's cool. And they might not necessarily get the whole message, but you would break through their wiring and hopefully cause a chain reaction. And then the manifesto, which you could find online, is it's inspired a lot of people. It's been translated into like 7 languages. The first year we did the project, there was somebody from Haiti who wrote a song called Keep on Crossing, a beautiful song. And so that's part of the transmission, this multifaceted campaign that then other people can kind of pick up on and take somewhere else, take to another level, that in their own community, in their own voice, but that it's kind of like a spark that that we do. And there was actually a funny story when we started Keep on Crossing, is that sorry, see, it's a revolutionary earthquake. Is that we made some statues, some monitos also in Tijuana, like the piggy banks. And we had, Perry and I had an exhibit at the Museum of Contemporary Art, and we had them made in Mexico. So we were bringing them back on a holiday weekend, Friday at like 4 o'clock. And luckily we had made the cover of the San Diego City beat, because it came in handy. As we got to the border crossing after waiting like an hour, the guards told us we were in the wrong line, that we were supposed to be in the commercial line, that they wouldn't let us cross, that they were going to hold everything until Monday, or Tuesday, when we can come back and argue our case. But the exhibit was that night. We had a huge crowd at the Museum of Contemporary Art. So we tried all these arguments that that weren't working on the guy. The guy was really serious. And then we pulled out the magazine cover and we're like, look, here, it's a Keep on Crossing Awards. We got to do it tonight. And then the guy got really serious. And he's like, because there were like 50 monitos back there. And we Keep on Crossing Awards. He said, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You're giving people awards for crossing the border. We're like, no, 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 it's just art, it's comedy, blah, blah, blah. So, we talked about, no, it's Andy Warhol, multiplicity. He didn't get any of that.
Yeah.
But when we kind of made it funny and we showed him the cover of the City Beat, finally we fit into that box that we weren't commercial because artists never make money, because we weren't, political because it's this little, piggy bank or whatever. And so he was trying to put us in a box and not being successful. So he was going to put us in the only box that he knew. Like, no, you guys didn't get the right permit and you're going to be here till Tuesday. And we had to get out of that box into the box that we wanted to fit in. That's just a lesson for the activism or whatever, or community engagement that you do, is that when someone's looking at you, they're trying to box you, and you need to get out of their box because their box doesn't serve you.
Yeah.
So then after that, it went into museums and did some tours. But the main thing is that that's also a piece that has inspired people to do their own work. And people, like, this was in 2003, and I went to the Women's March against family separation in Washington, D.C. And somebody had the patch there. Like, wow. I ran it because I was interviewing people, and I said, hey, I do this thing called Keep on Crossing. And then they like showed me their shirt, and there was their patch. And I was like, what? So,
cool.
but also, to show that, activism, it can be humorous, it can be inspiring, it can be light, and you can still get the same message out there, the same outcome. But it's important not to be, buried in kind of the heaviness that they're throwing at you.
Yeah. So tell us more about this manifesto. Like, what was kind of the key content of it?
Well, the manifesto, it's not that long. It starts out in the course of, it basically.
You have it memorized?
What's that?
You have it memorized?
No, I do not. I wish I did.
You have it in front of you?
I have this to start. I can call it up. Let me see.
Let's hear it. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know I have it online, but I should have printed it out. But it was basically, it was tongue in cheek, but it was capturing the spirit of manifesto writing, that anyone kind of has the ability to do this. Like, you don't have to be Thomas Jefferson to write a manifesto. Put your ideas down, and they add to the larger national dialogue. Oh, here we go. I found it. Okay. Like I said, it's been translated into like 5 languages. And see, it says, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary to cross borders of political, social, linguistic, cultural, economic, and technological construction, we will cross. For long before there were borders, there were crossers. We are the proud sons and daughters of these crossers, and we hold that crossing is a basic human right. Furthermore, we hold this right to be illegal, alienable. Artificial borders of body and mind and spirit must be crossed off the list. For every star-crossed, cross-bearing, cross-platform, cross-dressing, cross-country, crosswalker at the crossroads of culture, the time has come to cross. We're living in a time when a truckload of toxic waste has more rights to cross than a human being. Wherever and whenever this is the case, we will cross. Our crossing will be assigned to other crossers that the time has come to cross. We will cross at intersections. Anywhere we cross will become an intersection by the act of our crossing. We will look both ways before crossing, and then, with the positive momentum of humanity, we will cross. We will cross into other manifestos. These include, but are not limited to, the Prague Manifesto for Esperanto, the Russell Einstein Manifesto Against Nuclear War, the Roxy Music Song Manifesto, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Plan of Delano, the Plan Espiritual de Aslan, and any other plans, declarations, or manifestations that encourage, promote, and reward crossing. When the border expands, we contract. And when the border contracts, we expand. And when it comes time to cross, we will cross all by ourselves. Wherever there are tired, huddled masses yearning to breathe free, we will cross. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, we will cross. As Martin Luther King wrote from the injustice-stained confines of a Birmingham jail, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. By wearing this patch, we declare that our garment be counted as a piece from Dr. King's single garment of destiny. And to ensure that the sun and the moon continue to shine on the smiling faces of the free, we will keep on crossing.
I like it.
Thank you.
I like it. So you cross over many genres of art as well. So tell us a little bit about the film you made, the short film you made about Tijuana.
Oh, okay, yeah. I did a documentary on the Tijuana music scene called La Esquina del Mundo, the border and rock and roll. And again, Tijuana was also, it's always been a really amazing, incredible cultural, creative nexus, music, politics, food, film. You know, some of you don't might not know this, but the film Titanic by James Cameron, um, huge box office success, huge award success, huge technology success, was actually filmed in Ensenada. And half the crew was Mexican from Mexico City and from Tijuana, as well as from Los Angeles. So it was the meeting of these two worlds of technology and plastic and just, artesania. Because all the wood you see, the chandeliers, all the clothes, everything, that's made by Tijuana artisans. And that's just as important to the film as the special effects. But it was also a moment when these two worlds came together that it gave opportunities to the Mexican film community to show what they had to deliver. And they really, came to, made it work. And, when you look at history of how story is told, that's part of the story that they don't tell. But it's such an important thing and moment. And then Master and Commander was filmed down there, and Fox opened a studio for the making of Titanic. But the ability just to fuse all these things together becomes natural when you're in that environment. But knowing where you come from is very important. Did I answer your question? Or yeah, so the documentary was basically, shining a light on a community that was there. And there's so many bands that came out. And at that time, what was really critical too, it was when all these Mexico City bands were coming, Caifanes and Santa Sabina, all these groups, Maldita Vecindad, were kind of coming to LA, and they were kind of skipping San Diego, but Tijuana was a place where they would also go. So the LA community, the San Diego, the Tijuana, the Mexico City community was all there kind of at the same time. Manu Chao was there. And then things got, and this was when you could still cross the border. Like you could go to an exhibit or an opening in San Diego, drive to Tijuana, get tacos, and then drive back the same night, in like 30 minutes. But now it's totally changed. So if you go down to Tijuana, it's like a 4-hour commitment just in traffic, and that border's always been kind of artificial. So it's important, for the people who saw, that a different world is possible, to know that the current state is not the reality that it has to be, that we don't have to buy into that we can change it. But it's, people need to see that. So we were excited about what we saw going on with the Tijuana music scene. And so we did that.
Yeah. I want to get into like some of this reoccurring theme of Tijuana, of the border, of this kind of cross-cultural kind of thing. We're gonna save that. We're gonna save that for kind of towards the end. But I want to ask you now about this. But the fact of the matter is, you made a film, and you made a documentary. We can go a couple directions that you're interested in music, but I'm really interested in, like, when did you decide to pick up a camera? Like, when did that like occur to you?
That was another, natural impulse. And we had a video camera, also when I was in high school, but so I would use that. But then it became clear that access is a big deal, because you could shoot all you want, but if you can't edit it, if you can't put music into it, you're kind of limited. So I've always wanted to do that. So I've been around filming as a writer, as a critic, as, writing film reviews and talking to filmmakers, learning my craft. But it's always been there. But it hasn't been until recently now that kind of the barriers to access are so low now. Back then, if you wanted to use, like, say, Adobe, what programs are in Creative Cloud now, if you wanted to use After Effects or Premiere or whatever, they were like $1,000 a pop. And now you can get the subscription for $52 a month, and you get the whole suite. This would have been amazing back then. But back then we had the telephone modems that were 4K. And so you wanted to upload a photo and it would take like 15 minutes. But now, we can do that with higher bandwidth. So what I did during, the 90s was mostly the written word. The things that I could upload fairly quickly. I wrote humor, satire. I created a site called Between the Lines. And then I was a writer for Pocho.com for many years. And then I put my writings on a site called Just Words. So my criticism and reviews, because that's the access that I had at the time. And then, of course, being live. So the filmmakers of that period, I really have a lot of respect for, because you needed to have, you know, a lot of money to get that equipment and infrastructure. So the main thing was you keep moving ahead with what you have, so that the opportunity, the technology, and the historical moment all connect. And I don't know if you heard Pocha was saying, and he hooked up with Pocha and he made movies. So that comes later. So anyways.
Well, my plan was to seamlessly transition into the OC Film Festival, but or the OC Film Fiesta, but you brought something else up that's kind of taking us on a little detour here, which is Pocho.com. So you wrote for Pocho.com. Can you tell us a little about that experience?
Yeah, a lot of people started adopting the moniker of Pocho back in the late 80s, early 90s. Lalo, of course, did Pocho magazine with Esteban Zul and a couple of other people. Pocha Peña, my partner, called herself Pocha Peña at the same time and started Pocharte. And when I was in college, I had the P8 movement. It was an 8-ball with a P on it for Pe Ocho, you know, Pocho. And so it was in reclaiming that derogatory term for something that we identified with. It's kind of the outsiders, you know. It was a little punk, it was a little, you know, avant-garde, new wave, but still raza and indigenista, and fun. You know, it's very easy to poke fun with a moniker like Pocho. These threads all kind of came together, and when I was writing my my humor stuff, Lalo invited me to write for Pocho, and I became the border bureau chief. And my stuff is really notable for being kind of surreal news parody. So like when I don't know if you remember, there was a big scandal that Firestone was selling defective tires to Mexico and the third world, and the treads were shearing off.
Yeah.
So I wrote a story that the president of Mexico bought all the extra tires to make huaraches, but that the treads were falling off. So, and then when New York became a big casino in Vegas,
yeah,
I wrote a story that Vicente Fernandez was making a cactus-shaped casino called Guadalajara, Guadalajara. And it was obvious from the article that it was satire.
Yeah.
But it was so, I don't say it's, you know, so well done that people wanted to believe. And we said things like, in gambling, they only use pesos because anytime you use pesos, it's a gamble. That Vicente would come out and give hourly lessons on deflowering. That they had chickens, like cockfights every evening. Stuff is totally ridiculous. But then I would get emails like, "Oh my God, I can't find the website. I'm so looking forward to this. Go Chente. Where do I sign up? Where do I get reservations?" And then like every couple of years, it started to like surge in the internet. So we decided to do a search when we posted it again on Pocho as to where these hits were coming from, because it was tons of hits. And we saw that the one place that had the biggest hits was a small village in Mexico. And when we researched it, it was Vicente Fernandez's hometown. And they had put it on their website as like, you know, this is our native son, Vicente Fernandez. He's doing so well. If you're in Las Vegas, check out this hotel. And but the idea that you could use humor to impact reality, was something that's become a cornerstone of like the work that I do. That people like it so much that they wish it was real, and then it becomes real. Another thing that I did a few years later when I went to Montreal was I wanted to culture hack something. So poutine is really big in Montreal. It's like fries with cheese, curd, and gravy. And so I did a fake news release about how a poutine burrito was the craze now, and that it was called the putito, or the puto for short. And I in the fake news release, I talked about immigrant issues, and I talked about LGBT. There was like acceptance, and so all these really cool things in there. But the bottom line was, people wanted this poutine burrito so much that the Minister of Culture for Canada in Los Angeles retweeted it, and it's now a real thing. If you go to Canada and if you Google a poutine burrito, it's a real thing. And it's good. It's really good.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good. All right. So tell us. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you about your collaboration with Pocho Peña, and we'll get into that. But before we do that, I've put this question to several people who have either worked around Pocho.com or call themselves Pocho or work with some level of whatever. if you had to create a Mount Pochismo, right? Like a Mount Rushmore, right? Who would be on there? Who would be on Mount Pocho? Who are the
Um,
quintessential, who are the quintessential Pochos? Then
Paul
you
Rodriguez. No, I'm just kidding.
you don't have to pick like proud Chicanos or whatever because they'll probably get mad. So like we kind of talk about like who are like the self-identified greatest Pochos, whoever.
Well,
Whatever.
I mean, there are people that are pochos that don't even know it, but the ones that use pochismo as a tool, I
Yeah.
mean, Lalo, of course, Culture Clash, the people that were in Latins Anonymous, pioneer trailblazers that were doing this when nobody else was doing it or nobody was buying it. They had the courage to say, I'm going to do it and commit to it. There's the Pochoa Collective in Texas, ourselves, of course. Chicano Secret Service, even though they're called Chicano. But I mean, there's more, but those are the ones that come right to mind at the time. Lalo Guerrero, though, would be the quintessential like Uber Pocho. He's like the start of that cultural mixing, and he's interesting because he was both famous and unknown in Mexico and the U.S. So in Mexico, they knew him for the stuff that they did in Mexico, and nobody in the U.S. knew him for that. And in the U.S., they knew him for the stuff that they did here, but nobody in Mexico knew him for that. So that's part of the Pocho experience. Like you can do all this stuff, and people might not put it together, but you're still doing it and impacting lives.
Yeah. But like, so this was like a Rushmore though. So there's only like the quintessential. I'll let you think about it more. All right.
Yeah, I'll let everybody pick their own. It's like
yeah, all right, yeah. We're not gonna start any controversies here. Okay. So tell us about your collaboration with Pocho Peña.
Pocha and I, it's really funny because we first met in the mid 90s when she was a student at UCLA, and I worked at Isaac and Jude Artenstein's Cafe Cinema in San Diego, which is really important, cultural space. And she came to show a film there, and we never really hit it off. Years later, like 10 years later, she came to work at the San Diego Latino Film Festival where I was working, and we really hit it off because we had a really great sense of humor. But at that time, when we discussed it later, I thought she was like this pretentious arty type, and she thought I was this pretentious arty type because we had just met for a short window and we were just like really busy getting her screening together, so we didn't really have time to hang out. But then 10 years later, we're like, oh shoot, I wish we would have connected like 10 years earlier. But when she came to the work for the San Diego Latino Film Festival to be the director for a couple of years, we really hit it off, seeing that we had the same kind of sense of humor. And then we organically, as we started working on issues, we were working on the resolution of the boycott of the Centro Cultural de la Raza at that time. We worked really well together, and it's hard to find a collaborator like that you're on the same wavelength, you can trust, you're both throwing in these great ideas, you both bring a lot to the table. And the first thing that we did together was a project called Aztec Gold with a Lucha Libre character. And then that people really liked that. And again, it was one of these projects that people engaged with at such a level that you knew you kind of hit gold. Like we created the character, and we would do field interviews at protests and pickets and cultural events and stuff. And then we Comic-Con, whatever. And we would talk to people, and they're like, "Oh, what's your name?" And they'd be, "Oh, my name is Lou Chalibre." And people go, "I've heard of you. I know you." And there was no way they could have heard of me because we just created it, right?
Yeah.
But it captured the imagination so much that people had created their own perception that they were part of this project, which had not existed before. And so when you see that, you really want to run with it and take it as far as it'll go. And we've done big extravaganzas in San Antonio and San Diego that is spoken word and lucha and teatro and music, what we call the lucha novela. It's kind of like an improv telenovela kind of structure. And then we did exhibits and videos and appearances. And then we, that morphed into, now that we have this mechanism for interviewing people, for carrying conversations, then the conversations became more significant. So then we moved into other projects like Dreamocracy in America, which we're doing now.
Can you before we talk about Dreamocracy in America, can you expand upon what exactly is a lucha novela?
Lucha novela. A lucha novela is the main kind of concept, which I really like, and it's kind of hard to explain, but if you work with people and they've had a couple of drinks, they're into it. So you have like a telenovela story that involves some kind of crisis, and you know, 3 or 4 of the people on stage are trained. You know, they're actors, and there's a lucha through line. But then you pick somebody from the audience, and they become the main character. So you say, oh, can we have anybody from the audience? And then they come up, and then you explain to them what they're going to do. Oh yeah, like you are what drives this story. And so all these situations are kind of thrown at them, and they have to react on the spot. And the other performers are really like helping them to look good, you know, playing off what they say. And then you end with some kind of lucha conflict. Like there's always like a bad guy, there's some issue that this person has to solve the problem. In Texas, it could be the Alamo, and you know, it could be you know, Standing Rock. It could be, you know, corruption in City Hall, but a local issue. But you train the audience and the participant to be active, you know, players in this solution. You know, and the more you make it fun and absurd, really, it's about getting people to break that wall between them and activism, between them and performance. And what we've seen is that, you know, when we talk about creativity, and I think it's especially true in communities of color, there are people who have natural talent and natural tendencies when they're kids. They like music, they like dance, they like comedy, they like acting, but then it's beat out of them for like 20 years. And then when they're 35, 45, 55, or in times like this pandemic, when you're forced, you know, at this abyss of there's nothing else to do, if you can reach back and to tap into that person, that creative self that you were, you can have a lot of fun, and a lot of it comes back to you. But there's so much conditioning not to do that, to get a real job, a respectable job. And then as you get up in the art world, you realize that the people that are known artists, they have a lot of financial infrastructure. Either they come from wealthy families or wealthy communities, or they have patrons. But when you're a Chicano, or you know, you're coming from a working class community, you don't have access to that. So you think that your success or lack of success is because of other factors.
Yeah.
When in your reality, your stuff is just as good. Your stuff is maybe just as necessary, but you're not trained to think, how do I get it to that step where other people can see it?
Yeah.
You know, and then hopefully we can get paid for it. But most importantly, with the access that we have now, if you do a poem, or you do a song, or you do a rant, it can be seen all over the world.
Right.
You know, and with Dreamocracy in America, which we'll talk about later, we're interested in having the conversations online so that they not only get to the academics and the cultural workers and the artists, but that they can be found by people in rural communities who need that message, who feel isolated and alone. And they look out their window and they see all these MAGA dudes and all these, you know, Klan stuff, and they may feel afraid. It's good to have a place where they can go and realize that they're part of a larger community, and a community that you know, that can empower them.
Yeah. Well, tell us now about Democracy in America, to kind of expand upon that. Tell us about, like, you know, what it does, how it functions.
All right. Well, yeah. Dreamocracy in America was an idea we had like 4 years ago, and the idea was that, you know, as artists, you have feelers. You know, you can pick up things from the environment. You can make connections really fast. And one thing that we saw, well, now it's like 8 years ago now, but we saw that fascism was coming. Like the signs were all there, and we wanted to there were 2 conversations we wanted to have. One was Dreamocracy in America, that said all the people that we saw fighting to defend what Americans are taught democracy is all the people of color, the women, the Native community, the prisoners, the dreamers, the LGBT community, immigrants, prisoners. Their rights are being taken away, and they're fighting the hardest to defend it. But all the people that claim the flag and claim democracy and claim this tradition, they're giving it away. Like, I don't care. Oh, you know, we got Russia meddled in our elections. I don't care. You know, as long as I get my hamburgers and my haircut, you know. And it was so absurd that we wanted to shine light on these people that were doing amazing things in the community, and have those conversations out there. So we came up with this, and the second one, just to go real quickly, was because they were talking about redoing NAFTA, and NAFTA was coming up on an anniversary, and it was kind of a failure. We wanted to do our own called LAFTA, the Latin American Free Thought Agreement. And the reason we wanted to take the conversation there is because laughter is a great tool for empowerment and for psychological, decompression and power subversion. But also all these countries that had been through fascist governments and survived had an important lesson to teach us about how we need to deal with these things. And one of the main things is that when the reality is warped, do not buy into that reality. If you accept that everything is fake and everything is mediated and constructed, then construct your own healthy reality based on what you see, And just because they say, oh, we're divided and there's clan and racists everywhere, if you don't see that in your community, don't get afraid of it. Build up the things that you see that empower you, And so flash forward 4 years later, and we applied for a creative capital grant back then, and we'd applied for other things. But when, Trump became president, all these things that we had kind of warned about, that we were interested in investigating, were all suddenly real. And so it was no longer an academic conversation. It was no longer, conversation for conversation's sake. We were talking about real strategies and real battles for real rights. And now people are dying and kids are still in cages and all these rights are being taken away. It's such a plundering that we need to understand the strategies that work. With the Standing Rock, they used drones to get the message out. Their signals were being jammed by the authorities. They had to figure out how to get the message out. And that was, again, when I talk about like this indigenous kind of collectivist movement, that was really where technology and spirituality really connected together. It was a very spiritual movement, and what was at stake was life or death. But but bringing in technology took it to another level, because just like anything else, if they had done that but nobody saw it, they would have just like arrested them in a week and they'd be gone and it would be gone from history. But it was so inspirational and such a learning training ground for people, but also something that captured the imagination, where people could see how they related to it. And it was just so compelling that's the kind of activism we need to be working on, because you're outgunned economically, you're outgunned literally. There's more of them. Not more of them. They have more money and they're more concentrated. They can wait you out. But if you do a political cartoon and you post it on the web, or if you do memes, or you connect, or more importantly, you write your representatives, you have access. They can't stop you from doing that. So just keep doing it until they. I used to say in a poem, "Spread the good word until the good word is heard." That you just keep doing that, And in terms of technology, we go back to European, communism. It's like we must, seize the means of production. We're in an era beyond that. We can become the means of production. You with your laptop or your phone, me with my phone, we're having a conversation. People are seeing all over the country. It doesn't cost us more than our data plan to do it. So rather than playing video games or doing whatever, or looking at cat videos, which are also important, we can do this, and it adds to that conversation. And right now, we're at a moment in history when people really need these conversations. They need to laugh. They need to be inspired, because the stakes are so high, and we need to just, again, be conscious of our own realities and our own power to change the world and the greater reality. When we hear people like those, Reopen America types, usually it's people in, Anglo people, I got to say that, but usually it's people in really low risk categories. People who probably have healthcare, people probably live with one or two people in their house. And if they get infected, they may not get sick, but they're going to spread it to 20 essential workers. But if a person in a working class community gets sick, they're going to spread it to 20 people in their family.
Right.
So let them go to the bars, let them do all that stuff, but don't buy into it. Do stuff that inspires you. Pick up a guitar, tell jokes, call your family. Don't feel isolated. But humor is so important in our community, especially when you don't have other forms of resistance.
Yeah. So tell us about our time is coming, drawing to near, and we do have a few comments in the section. Rick Nahara seems to want attention right now. Is that Nahara or is it Nahara? Do you know that? That's a question.
I think he pronounces it Nahara, but I've pronounced it.
But I feel it's wrong. I feel like it's
It
wrong.
depends. If you're a pocho, it's Najera.
I
If
feel like
you're
that's like I feel like a Colorado roughneck way of saying things. It's like some type of like like just kind of like
yeah. But
that's
one thing that's also important about pochismo and about chicanismo,
yeah,
and is it pochismo at its root is kind of the mixture of cultures, and chicanismo too, right? The
yeah,
different razas coming together. So this idea of mixed race is
yeah.
really chicanismo, you know.
But like
Um,
okay, but when I say it Nahara, like he says it like Nahara, I get like the taste of a Denver omelet in my mouth. You know, it's like, I feel like this like wagon like trail meeting the like like the chuck wagon meeting the frontier or
right.
something like that. Yeah,
Well, there you go. That's America, man. That's America. No, and Rick's doing really great stuff. I
the
mean,
Denver omelet. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. But you know, coming from San Diego, that's an important question because, like, if you're in Texas, you could be in the middle of Texas, and everyone speaks English and Spanish.
right,
But
right,
you're in San Diego, and you're 15 minutes from Mexico, and you can go into whole miles of communities where nobody speaks Spanish.
right.
You know, so if this were San Diego, it would be Najera. If it were in Tijuana, it would be Najera. But Denver omelet, yeah. And I'm not going to get into the burrito breakfast taco conversation in this one.
No, we don't have time. We don't have time. We gotta get fun to the OC film fiesta. So that's kind of that's a big one. So like
Yes.
how did you move into to like okay, I'm gonna have a film festival?
Well, Bocha and I have always been around film, and we worked together, like I said, the San Diego Latino Film Festival. And then when we moved to San Antonio, we directed the Cine Festival for a couple of years, the 30th and the 31st. And then when we were moving back to California, there was an opportunity to start a festival in conjunction with the city of Santa Ana. And Santa Ana, if you know it, it's like 80% Latino. It's not your stereotypical, Real Housewives of OC, but demographically, it's closer to what Orange County really is. Orange County is like, I think, 60% people of color,
Mhm.
and a lot of working class people. And the main reason there's a high concentration in Santa Ana, other than historical, this used to be Mexico, and this was an important part of California back in the 40s, 1830s, is that this was one place where Mexicanos were allowed to buy land because of all the covenants and the housing and the redlining. So it's kind of funny because for 40, 50 years, it's the only place that Latinos can buy property. And then now with gentrification, all the people that fled in white flight are kind of reclaiming it as their homeland. They want to redefine Santa Ana. And it's like, well, where were you for like 40 years, So even though, and this is an important thing to get across to people right now, the Latino community is the largest economic force in the country right now. So what is it, like $1.7 trillion purchasing power?
Yeah.
So we need to start acting like it. And when people come and say, oh, and this was important when we're talking about the gentrification of Santa Ana, during the recession, at the time where everybody's losing money, the Latino market is the only one that was really making money. Consumers buying food, buying quinceañera dresses, the internal, they're using their spending power to live their culture. But the message from the developer from downtown was like, oh no, we need to make it more popular to the South County people and trendy because downtown will die otherwise. And as you see all these businesses that are serving the local community, and again, we talk about constructed reality, that message was totally false. And this person had the most to gain. But if people believe that message, oh yeah, let's get rid of the quinceañera shops, you're really getting rid of that economic reality of this huge purchasing power that you can tap into. So as Latinos, that's the one thing we need to get across is, the demographics are in our favor right now. And so we came back and we started the Film Fiesta, and we did that for 5 years as a free community festival. It was a cinematic celebration of Orange County's diversity, Santa Ana's diversity and Orange County's multicultural heritage. So we could have conversations about the last 200 years of Orange County culture through film, and we would tie film screenings with gentrification, with housing, with health, with homelessness to get community conversations going. And then after that, we started Media Arts Santa Ana because we branched out into teaching classes. So we did a teen cinema camp, a murals and media class. We now have a Millennial Producers Academy under MASA, Media Arts Santa Ana. So this was a way to just keep the discussions going And we also learned, something we call practical social practice is ways to use our creative tools to engage with city officials, because social practice is a kind of art that you do in community, that you call attention to something and people see it and they learn, and then it goes away. It's kind of ephemeral. But we said, why can't we use social practice to change policy? Why can't our audience be the city council and because we knew going into city council meetings that the developers and the people with money had tools that we did not have access to. They could bribe, they could take people out to fancy dinners, they can make all these contributions. We couldn't do that, but we could inspire. And so we work with the activists here by adding performative elements to their strategies. It helped them win fights that they had been fighting for a long time. And I think it was really transformative. But if you go up to, it's like your city council member and you're like, oh, I hate you, you're corrupt, and you're going to vote you out, blah, then they're not going to listen to you, right? Even if you're right. But if you go and you're like, man, you really look good if you do this, or here's some cookies, or wow, look at this, let me give you this flyer, and you slowly over time, make friends with them. You don't compromise or sell out or anything, but you find that way to communicate that takes you out of that box, that you're the thread, that you're the crazy activist, and you're like, oh, you're my friend, you have good ideas, you can, like I said, make me look good, you can help our community, then you can get things done. Because we realize, we're not like hardcore like flag burning activists, but the developer in downtown was painting us like that. So it's like, oh, don't talk to Payan because they're the militant activists, blah. And we work with militant activists, but that's not our core mode of communication. So when people actually met us, they saw that whatever the other side said wasn't true. And it kind of deflated what they were saying. But it's important that we were able to represent ourselves. If you're in community, that you get that face time. And now that we're all in lockdown, if you're going to talk to your representative, you can use FaceTime to have FaceTime, But they have access and they're trained to fight that way. Our tools are just as effective. We just need to know how to use them.
Yeah. So how have you migrated so much of the work you were doing? I mean, I know a lot of what you do is online anyways, but how have you migrated some of the work that you would do kind of more face-to-face to the internet in this period of the pandemic?
When we were starting our Dreamocracy in America conversations, we were going to do them as podcasts, and we were going to do them as site specific. We go to different communities like Denver and Washington State, Texas. Just to get a little backtrack, an important point I left off of Dreamocracy in America is that in 1831, the French nobleman Alexis de Tocqueville came to the U.S. to study the prisons, and he ended up staying for a few months and traveling around what was the U.S. at that time at the 1831 border. And he wrote a really interviewing people of all walks of life. And he wrote a really influential book called Democracy in America, which if you read it today, nails that mindset down completely. But there was a big problem is he didn't talk to people of color, women. It was mainly landed white men, slaves, indigenous people. So the crux of Democracy in America is that we're talking to all the people he didn't talk to, and specifically west of the 1831 border. But now we did a series of conversations with pandemic hotspots, because those are also front lines of race, class, and history. And so when the pandemic hit, we had to cancel all those plans. And then Sandra had been in a Zoom, or Pocha had been in a Zoom class with Sandra Lilia Velasquez. We said, well, this is a tool we could use. So then we just immediately shifted our programming to online, realizing that it was going to live there, that we could record it and then put it on YouTube without skipping a beat. So now that's actually expanded and accelerated our conversations. And we hope that people visit them. If you go to dreamocracyinamerica.org, you can find the archive of videos. We're on YouTube also. And then victorpayan.com is my website for some of the other projects. And we're also going to be doing like a speaking workshop tour. And we're planning to connect with colleges and cultural centers. But the pandemic put a hold on that. But we are still available for online workshops and whatnot. So we do things about practical social practice, about humor, about using interventions, about diffusing and defusing tension, doing things in protests, whatnot, how like not to get killed, basically, to keep it funny. Another project we did was called the Minute Maids, which was at Chicano Park. And again, when you talk about the process, it's very important. So the Minute Men were planning a protest at Chicano Park, and it was when they were getting really violent. They were using video, like they would go jam up people, and then people get mad, and they'd videotape, and they go, "Look, the Aslanistas are violent people. Look at we just went, and poor innocent us, and we got yelled at and threatened." But what they were doing is they were promoting violence and then filming the reaction, right? So we're like, how do we get beyond that? How do we get into the DNA, into the circuitry, and short circuit it? So the first thing we did, because as you know, probably in LA, it's the same. When like the Minutemen or the Klan or whoever have a protest, they get a permit. The police are there protecting, making sure they don't get hurt, and they're all on their side, and it looks like they're supporting them, right? Same thing is happening in San Diego. So Chicano Park, if you've ever been there, it's got the Central Park area, and then a street, and then another place where the racquetball courts and the basketball courts are. So they had a permit to be on that side, which was completely visible from Chicano Park. Like 30,000 people coming, families, little kids, really beautiful event every April. And then so we said, well, you can't get rid of them. What can we do to like minimize their presence? So we said to the steering committee, said, where do you park your vendors? Because they have really tall trucks. Like, oh, we park them at the vendor lot. Well, get the ones with the tall trucks and park them in front of their protest so that they're on the sidewalk, but then they've got this big row of trucks, big wall of trucks in front of them. So you can't see them, you see the trucks. And so they did that, and that was effective. And then we just said, what's, just like we keep on crossing, what's one figure they can't not like? The question with the Minute Maids was, what's one figure that even the most racist anti-immigrant person is totally cool with? And we figured it was the maid, right? Because even like remember when Pete Wilson turned out that he had an undocumented maid, and Schwarzenegger, and they always have so that's someone that could slip in and out of their world without arising suspicion. So we created the Minute Maids, and it was artists who dressed up like maids. They just really had the maid smock, and then a feather duster of destiny, and they had lemonade to eliminate racism. And so they would go back and forth, and the Minutemen had no idea what we were doing, and they weren't threatened by us, and we didn't feed into their anger. But on the other side, where the Chicano Park was, people would start gathering to start yelling at the Minutemen, and then we were on that corner, like right in front of them, with signs making fun of the Minutemen, and then suddenly, like the Minutemen would see like this crowd come up angry, talk to us, and then start laughing, and then start taking pictures with us. And they're in the background, like when you go to Tijuana and you've got like the striped donkey, like the tourists, they were the striped donkey of that protest, because they became a prop in our action, and they had no clue what we were doing. So they didn't get their footage, they didn't get their violence and anger, and they left and you could see them get confused, and they actually saluted us after we explained what we were doing at the end. But part of what we do is designed to create a chain reaction. And the chain reaction that happened there was that, and this is a true story, that shortly after that engagement, the Minutemen imploded. There was a man and a woman that were like the leaders, and they were really vicious people. They turned against each other, and then they started using their video, takedowns against each other. And so the woman got kicked out of the Minutemen, and then she went to Arizona and hooked up with some supremacists over there. This is a true story. They got the bright idea that they would rob drug dealers by dressing up as cops. And so they went to a house with guns, and they banged on the door and let themselves in. But it wasn't a drug dealer. It was just a regular family. So they beat up the family, ended up killing one or two of the members, and then left. And the reason they got caught was because I think the daughter in that family had hid in the closet or under a bed, and she identified them. But this was the same person that was at that protest where we were. So it's very important when you realize you're dealing with people that can actually hurt you, that you are trained to diffuse that tension and get the message to empower your community. Whether they get it or not, it's not important. Whether it empowers your community to move forward and not get hurt is really critical. But at the same time, if they like you, it will create that deprogramming, and they might not hit you as hard, or they might question what they're doing, or they might at least feel like jerks about being the guys that are making you guys, you know, your friendly event look like a crime scene, you know. So that's part of the nature of what we do, is just diffusing tension, turning things on their heads, using strategies that we've learned with comedy and improv, cantinflas, of course, very important, to move, you know, to move ourselves in our culture forward.
Yeah. Well, it's been a great hour. We have a lot of comments, a lot of people just amplifying a lot of what you're saying. Unfortunately, with Zoom, I can only see 4 or 5 at a time. I know that we have 58 comments, so there's plenty to respond to in there. Um, it's been quite the hour. We've covered a lot of ground, as you have with your life. So I'm very very glad that we
Thank,
got to spend this hour together, Victor.
thank you, and thank you for inviting me to talk today. I'm really inspired by your work also. And the only thing I want to conclude in saying is, well, a couple of things is that you know, during some of the movements, I always say, you know, we're going to win because we're smarter, we're I don't know, I think faster, and we're better looking. So this is definitely true right now with all the MAGA heads. But the other thing is to inspire people to go out and create. If you've had an idea to write a book, if you've been turned away by Hollywood in the past, if you've got a record to record, if you've got a poem to spit out, get it out there, because the demographics are on our side right now. And they don't want you to know that, but you just look anywhere. You look at Netflix and you look at Amazon Prime, you look at the Oscars, you look at the record industry. They want what you're putting out. They want your story.
You know what?
So get it out there.
Before you go, I want to ask you this question. I do want to know your perspective on this. So we're facing this kind of double oppression here of misrepresentation and underrepresentation. And so oftentimes, in order to fight underrepresentation, we allow ourselves to be caught up in the wave of misrepresentation, right? You know, like something's better than nothing. This attitude, right? So like this idea that, you know, like we can only appear on television as like cholos or maids, right? Or something that was some stereotype. There's nothing wrong with maids, something wrong with being janitors, something wrong with these things. But it's just like they have this idea. There's something wrong with the way they portray maids. There's something wrong with the way they portray janitors, and there's something wrong with the way they end up portraying us. So how do we simultaneously fight these things of both misrepresentation and underrepresentation?
Well, you have to tune it out. You have to divest yourself economically, informationally, socially from that message, because it's completely false. You have, and what we work with history a lot, and a lot of artists, you know, Chicano artists and activists, you know, artists of color, really work with history because the answer is there. You know, if you want to take apart a stereotype, look at the real histories, and you'll find that most of the time the stereotype was created to disempower somebody that had power, to take their land, to rape them, to throw them in prison, to take away their laws and protections, by people who were doing exactly that. Like if they claim that the Latinos, like with Trump, you know, oh, they're all rapists and criminals. He represents a group of racists and criminals calling us rapists and criminals, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to understand that. You have to throw it back, externalize it, don't internalize it. If you see something's fake, you got to speak about it. But get that perspective that history, back when I was in my 20s, you go to the bookstore and it's just like Octavio Paz and Sandra Cisneros, right? And now there's tons of books. They're online. You can read them. You can get ebooks. You'd go to look at the movie section and it's just like, you know, what do you call it? El Norte and Zoot Suit, right? It's all that there was. And now there's so many other things. And we're the ones that are creating. We got to be the creators, not the consumers of the media. And then people will see, like you just said, what do we do when we're facing that situation? We find the media that educates us and reinforces what we know is true. And then we create media that does that for somebody else. But if you have a few minutes, I want to read a poem, if I may.
Oh, absolutely.
That it kind of addresses that. And this was written, I think, in like 93. I did a chapbook with Red Calaca Arts called The Interior. So this is from that. It says, to a cholo dying young. It says, and to think I could have been you in another decade, in another neighborhood, in another bunch of friends, And you who they call yourself cholo, muy cool y muy smooth, con safosique, could have been me. Could never have known the joint, your pinto brothers blown away in the whole pinche enchilada. But I am you, mano. Neither of us escaped the other, brother, though we spit contempt with our eyes like angry frogs because we know this to be true. You are chained to me and I to you. Only I never been in prison and you never been to school, and every needle you took from me was an insult I took for you. You got high for my sins, ese, and you, who they call yourself cholo. And you will not die in a warm bed, and I will not die with the warm, brown, liquid heaven swimming in my head, and yet we will die together, like our grandfathers might have died together, in another country, in another century, when they called it revolution. But neither of us will know if we play this free holier than thou bullshit, mas Joaquin que la chingada. Never pretend to never care, never admit that the other one's there, lurking under clothing and a cut of hair. My reality was never so hard, and my dreams you will never share. We are standing on either side of midnight, the border between night and day, which is yet so close and only heartbeats away. But neither of us is running up to the other, shouting, pleading, demanding, won't you be my neighbor, instead of won't you stay a stranger? Because a cholo is a person in my neighborhood, and after all, aren't we talking about dignity, Jack? No one gave it to you, and no one can give it back. Here's a little secret I've got to tell. No one goes to heaven and no one goes to hell. It takes more than cool to stay in school and more than a teardrop to earn respect. Sticks and stones and broken homes and names designed to keep you down. You, who they call yourself cholo, before you leap, you better look down. Before you come out shooting, you better look around. We are not the cowboys in this town. Together we swim or together we drown. You are me and I am you, and both of us are brown. So that's a little taste from the 90s there. Throwback. But there's a lot of great people doing a lot of great work. Support them, learn what they're doing. You know, your conversations are great. But more importantly, be the creative force. Get your message out there. You need to do it, and other people need to hear it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Victor. It's been informative. It's been great, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.